this week, chapter 41 of Isaiah, starting in verse 21. And this is Isaiah, who's writing almost 700 years before Christ. And as he's writing, he's building his case against idolatry. And the children of Israel were drawn into idolatry, and idolatry is whenever we worship something we should use or use something we should worship. That's a kind of a neat definition someone thought of. That means that you can worship money. We're supposed to use money. Or you can worship your job, or you can worship pleasure, you can worship whatever. And whenever we worship something we're merely supposed to use, that becomes idolatry. And whenever we use something we're supposed to worship, and people use God, they kind of use him as a genie, and they rub him and say, I command you to do this, and you must do that, and they kind of rub in the bottle like this. That's idolatry too, whenever you use God, who alone is to be worshipped. But here, Isaiah is talking about the futility of idols. He says in verse 21, present your case, says the Lord. Remember I told you 3,800 times the writers of Scripture say they aren't talking, God's talking. There's one right there. There are 3,799 other times it says that. But present your case, says the Lord. Bring forth your strong reasons, says the King of Jacob. That's an interesting name of God, the King of Jacob. Jacob means deceiver, supplanter, push people out of the way. God is the King of sinners. In fact, the only people in heaven are going to be sinners. None of those good people will get to heaven because God only takes sinful people. He only takes people that know they're sinners. He only takes people that admit they're sinners. He only takes people that allow him to wash away their sins, like he did to Jacob. But look at verse 22. Let them bring forth and show us what will happen. In other words, he's saying, let them tell the future. He says, line up your idols. Get them all, put them all on the shelf. They can't get up by themselves. Pile them all up there. Put a little something behind them so they don't tip over. And let them tell us what's going to happen in the future. And he listens. Anybody have anything to say? Continue in verse 22. Let them show the former things, what they were. Well, if they can't tell the future, let them tell us about our origin. Let them tell us where we came from. Let them tell us what began this universe. Because the idols don't know the future and they don't know the past. They don't know anything. In fact, a little bit later, Isaiah says that you take a log, he said, and you cut part of it off and make your idol out of it and put it on the shelf, and you take part of it and you start your fire and cook your dinner. And what he's saying is, what makes the part you put on the shelf more powerful than the part that cooks your dinner? It's all equally inanimate and powerless. Continuing in verse 22, that we may consider them and know the latter end of them, or declare to us things to come. Show the things that are to come hereafter, that we may know that you are gods. Okay, whoever can tell the future. Whoever can tell the future, not like the Inquirer, that vaguely, there will be an earthquake somewhere on the earth in the next 10 years. I mean, I can do that, But let them tell to the minutest detail people, places, events, cataclysmic events, world rulers, kingdoms that will take over other kingdoms, conquerors that will conquer other kingdoms, locations where people will be born, exact details of how people will die, the exact timing of when people, let them tell the future that way, God says, and then we'll know they're gods. And what he says is, hands down, God says, I'm the only one that can do that. And it's true. Even the great astrologers and magicians and soothsayers of Daniel's time, one of the most elaborate groups there ever were, the Chaldeans, when confronted with a king that said, tell me what I dreamed last night, they said, no one on this planet can do that. And Daniel said, my God can. My God can. So can yours this morning. And this morning, what is the simplest and yes, most profound evidence that the Bible offers to us of its veracity is the reality that this book, when it was written, was more than 1/3 prophetic. In other words, as the men wrote, as the 40 authors that were utterly convinced they were writing God's words, wrote those words down, 1/3 of them were prophetic portraits of future events. Prophecy fulfilled is an irrefutable verification reserved to the Judeo-Christian scriptures alone. Prophecy is the missing element in all other sacred scriptures of the world's religions. There is not one world religion that has prophecy in it. Not one. They're not dumb enough to try that one. They know they can't tell the future, so they don't even try. If you search this morning the Quran, if you search the Hindu Vedas, if you look at the Bhagavad Gita, if you look at the Book of Mormon, if you look in the sayings of Buddha, if you even look at some American cults like the writings of Mary Baker Glover Patterson Fry Eddy, who started Christian Science, if you contrast, she had 7 husbands. And in the end she couldn't even find one of them that worked, She just kept turning them in for a new one. But if you look at all of them, and you contrast them to the Bible, what you find is that the Scriptures alone, the Holy Scriptures from God, contain detailed prophecy of the future. Dr. Wilbur Smith, who had about 20,000 books in his library and read all of them, wrote this down. Whatever one may think about the authority and the message presented in the book that we call the Bible, there is a worldwide agreement that in more ways than one, it is the most remarkable volume ever produced in the 5,000 years of writing on the part of the human race. Why is that, Wilbur? Because it's the only volume ever produced by man or a group of men in which is to be found a large body of prophecies relating to individuals, to nations, to Israel, to every group of people on earth, to specific cities, and to a coming one who is to be called the Messiah. It's the only book. It's the only book that talks about, describes, and names who's going to come to save this world. And it was written, and he was prophesied 4,000 years ago. And he came right on time, just as they said. The ancient world had many different devices for determining the future, known as divination, but not in the entire gamut of Greek and Latin literature, which are the 2 large literature groups. Even though they use the words prophet and prophesy, can we find in any of them any real specific prophecy of a single historic event to come in the distant future? There's not one. Go through all the Greek writers, go through all the Latin writers, all of Western civilization, you'll not find one prophecy of a future Messiah. Neither can the founder of any cult in this country rightly identify any ancient text specifying that they would come. Not one. When I say prophecy this morning, and when I say this book you can trust because of its prophetic content, I'm talking about detailed, specific descriptions of future events. Not just a few. It's not like we found 4 or 5, that we can kind of line up. There are literally hundreds of them. Hundreds of detailed, specific descriptions of future events. They're not close calls. It's not like, you remember when the fabulously wealthy Croesus went to see the Delphian oracle? Probably a lot of you remember that, don't you, from history? You were sleeping then and chewing gum and putting it under your desk. I know you. I did the same thing. But in the old days, they used to go to the Delphian oracle, and they'd stand in front of the oracle at Delphi. And Delphi was a rift, a volcanic rift, and there were poisonous gases that came up through the rift. And they had suspended a chair over that rift. And the Delphian oracles would go there and be lowered out over the rift, like that, and they would smell all this gas. And as it slowly intoxicated their system, they would start babbling and speaking in gibberish, or the same word most people think of for tongues. They would just speak a gibberish. And then another one of the oracles would interpret what they said from they weren't breathing the stuff. They were standing on the shore of the rift. And they'd say what they said. So King Croesus, the last and most wealthiest of all the great kings of Lydia, was going to face the Persians in battle. So he went to the Delphian oracle and gave them lots of money and says, what's going to happen? And they said, when you go to battle, a great kingdom is going to fall. And you all know the story. He was utterly decimated. And when his people came back and said, why did you let him go? They said, because a great kingdom did fall. It was his. Well, that's kind of a vague prophecy. God doesn't do it that way. It's not a close call. It was fulfilled to the letter. These are not historical accounts that tell us how it unfolded. They were prophecies written centuries and often many tens of centuries before the event happened, and we don't have to change one word of what they say. They utterly were fulfilled as written. That's what I mean by prophecy. And because of this undeniable verification of history that was pre-written by God, may I impress upon your hearts this morning that the book that you hold in your hands is unlike any book in the universe. And with that truth deeply upon your hearts today and in the days ahead, shouldn't you treat it differently? Shouldn't you trust it? Shouldn't you obey it? Shouldn't you decide today, if you've never met the one that sent us this book, that you need to meet him? And if you have met him, shouldn't you decide you're going to make some steps toward him today? Because he has undeniably revealed himself to us.